Welcome to Talking About Our Generation, the music show where we talk to some of the great luminaries of rock and pop's past, and we wander the highways and byways of musical history. My name's Gary McVeigh-Kane, and I'm joined as always by my partner in pop,
Simon Warner. How are you, Gary?
I'm not too bad, Simon. I'm fair to middling. I caught a documentary the other night. I don't know if you saw it, about Rockfield Studios in Wales. Did you see that?
I'm lining it up for later watching. I noticed it was on. Was it a good show?
It was interesting, but it was one of those documentaries that didn't go where I wanted it to go. You know what I mean? It started off with the story about how the studio came about, and it was two brothers who were both cattle farmers who both loved music, and they decided to buy some 8-track equipment. I think it was 4-track actually originally, back in the late 60s. And you thought, that's a really fascinating story. You know, you wanted to know more about these people as individuals, and why they decided to take that step out of dairy farming into rock music producing. And then it got a little bit bitty, really, because it started off by one of the first bands they had down there rehearsing and recording were Black Sabbath.
Wow.
When Black Sabbath had just began as a band. And they had Ozzy Osbourne talking about it, and he remembered it very fondly, being out in the countryside in Wales, and said for 4 guys who came from Aston in inner city Birmingham, who worked in foundries, to suddenly be in the Welsh countryside, they really took to that life and really enjoyed it, and they weren't the rock and roll animals that you might expect it to have been.
Did they have any reference to, I think, an artist called Dave Edmunds?
Yeah.
Rockpile. They had a #1 hit with "I Hear You Rocking," and I've got a feeling that was recorded at Rockfield.
It was, and that was a frustrating thing. There were so many really good stories of that studio. Queen recorded Bohemian Rhapsody there.
No.
Now, yeah, that's where they recorded Bohemian. In fact, that's where Freddie Mercury wrote Bohemian Rhapsody.
This is.
And because it was a residential, you know, they stayed in little rooms, very sparse rooms above the old cow sheds. Now, you would think, given that Bohemian Rhapsody was written and recorded there, there'd be a swathe of this 90-minute documentary given over to that.
Yes.
There was literally one minute given over to that, and it was when one of the farmer guys said, I walked in. I said to Roger, "Oh, where's Freddie?" He said, "Oh, he's in there playing the piano." He said, "I walked in. I stood up, looking over his shoulder." And he said, when he was just finishing his piano part of Bohemian Rhapsody. I thought, that's amazing. So we're really pleased to welcome to the show this week our special guest, former Inspiral Carpets frontman, now a brilliant singer-songwriter in his own right, Tom Hingley. Tom, how are you doing?
I'm fine. I've put my glasses on to try and create some kind of corporate sort of coherence between everyone involved.
Well, we are of a certain generation, so we have noticed male pattern baldness and glasses is kind of the way to go.
Yeah, you kind of, in your mentality, you always feel like you're still 5 years old. But at the beginning of the lockdown, I sort of went out running, and I went out running for 3 days running, and then I limped around for the next 2 weeks. So now I just walk around the park.
So were you doing that as a kind of program to get yourself fitter then, Tom? Or
well, I was fitter at the beginning of the lockdown. I mean, I lost a bit of weight a couple of years ago. I lost like 3 stone, but I put 2 stone of it back on. But but I've not been paying that much attention to my Adonis-like figure. I wrote this enormous thing on Facebook today of what I can't eat anymore, which includes sausages, bacon, bread. I can't drink alcohol. So I've just got to. I've not been. I mean, I think we're all going through. We've all got our difficulties with it, but I've just got to get with the program again, really, because you don't want to be putting weight on. With we don't want to dwell on it, but with this sort of virus going around, you don't want to be carrying too much weight around, really, if you can help it.
So music and television. These bedfellows haven't always had the happiest relationship, but I do remember as a 7-year-old tuning into the very first Top of the Pops on January the 1st, 1964. And I have to say that even though Jimmy Savile was present on that evening, a name we can hardly mention these days without possible consequences, Savile was there. But I have to say that over the next few years, Top of the Pops became my sort of formative TV experience. It's where I picked up my tastes, at least until they got a bit more sophisticated. And of course, that ran on until 2006. And I think after 2006, over 40-year-olds, and we all fall into that category, I think rather started to lose track of what was happening in popular music. And until that point, that appointment with the show on a Thursday or a Friday or a Sunday, it was originally a Wednesday, it moved all over the place. It was a kind of appointment with the current trends, the current sounds. And once Top of the Pops had gone, I think the link between the older British populace and what was happening in music was rather lost. And then, of course, we had other highlights, the Ogo Whistle Test and the Tube and MTV and so on. But I just wonder, Tom, did music and television have a connection for you? Do you remember watching music on television as a younger person?
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching, I think it probably would have been Tyrannosaurus Rex as opposed to T-Rex as they became later. And watching Mark Bolan and thinking, yeah, I'll be on Top of the Pops when I'm older. We used to like mime with tennis rackets. And so I never doubted that I would be on Top of the Pops. And I quite liked the artifice of it, the miming of it. I kind of understood the kind of fantasy element of it that was involved, that it was a narrative. It wasn't kind of authenticity. It wasn't real. And, you know, when I did do Top of the Pops, because I think we probably did it 6 or 7 times with Inspiral Carpets, and it was quite bizarre because the actuality of it was pretty much how I imagined it would be. You turn up and it's sort of civil service broadcasting. There's a commissioner on the front door, and if you're rude to him, you're not coming in. It doesn't matter whether you're Elvis Presley, you know, if you haven't got the right stickers and, you know, all that lot, he won't let you in. And then you've got the succession of kind of cameramen who are using sort of dollies and tracking things to take pictures, but they're normally doing Antiques Roadshow or some other program that they'd much rather be doing. And they're doing things like cursing you under their breath as the playback goes on. Look at his hair. What's that jacket he's wearing? It's ludicrous, as they run over some 12-year-old girl's leg and she starts screaming. So, I mean, that was the kind of actuality of being on Top of the Pops, which is actually exactly how I thought it probably would be.
I mean, you know, playing on tennis rackets, we've all done that and graduated onto guitars. But this idea of miming on television, we've all watched it, we've seen it. What was it like to mime on Top of the Pops? I mean, just talk through the miming.
It's probably very similar experience to being Boris Johnson as Prime Minister now, I would have thought. I mean, stop miming, to be honest. Sorry, you're going to have to repeat the question. What was it like miming? It was very easy because you were always miming in your head as you were singing along with the acts who were on there anyway. But I mean, there was a funny kind of, I know this is a bit of a heavy word to use, but there was a bit of an apartheid that went on Top of the Pops, because the bigger pop acts, like you'd Take That, they wouldn't make them sing live vocals when the kind of irritating indie bands that they didn't really want on there in the first place, they would always make them sing live vocals just because it would fit in with some remit that the BBC was supposed to be doing about being the patrons. By the way, I love the BBC, but, you know, it would fit in with some remit that the BBC was supposed to be doing about being a patron of the arts, while also sort of making it more difficult for these bands that they didn't really ever really want on there in the first place.
And you must have in your time in Inspiral Carpets, I mean, it was a time when there was lots of television, music on television in lots of different forms, like Saturday morning kids shows and all kinds of things. And you must have got caught up in having to do a lot of those kind of promo things. Can you remember any kind of really bizarre episodes that you had, either here or abroad, when you appeared on TV?
I'd love to say that my experiences of children's television was any more bizarre than any other part of Inspiral Carpets, but I think that's a supposition that I'm not prepared to make. I think it was probably the most normal thing in the world, sort of meeting Michaela Strachan and on Wackaday, and her asking me what my ambition was, and me saying, well, it was to have a breakfast cereal named after myself. Something like a sensibly. But I mean, I mean, just to come back to you, just let me say one more thing about television before I round back to what you're saying there, Gary. The kind of TV shows you used to watch was So It Goes with Tony Wilson on it, so that's where we saw a lot of the punk bands. The Revolver, which was a program that Peter Cook used to do back in the punk days, where he used to be very drunk and swear quite a lot on it. which was good. And usually the bands were quite good. The Tube was obviously very good. Obviously the Fall got onto the Tube, but the Fall only got onto the Tube because Half Man, Half Biscuit was supposed to be playing on that particular day, and Tranmere were away, and they refused to ever do a gig or TV if Tranmere were playing away. But then in our day, I suppose the chart show was very important.
Yes.
We did the 8:15 from Manchester, which was a sort of program that was on when Multicoloured Swap Shop wasn't on. We did the theme tune for them. They actually wanted us to do a little sort of thing on it, they wanted us to be a sort of Monkeys type band, a kind of cartoon band, which we didn't do. I'm not sure what that would have done for our career, but that's sort of what ended up being what S Club 7 ended up being. So perhaps maybe we should have done that. And so, I mean, we did the other side of Midnight. I mean, Inspiral Carpets originally did that when Stephen, the original singer, had left, and they were looking for another singer. So they did a version of Directing Traffic without a singer, and then about a month, 2 months later, we did a version of Sackville on there. But the other side of Midnight was quite an important show, I think, because it's the first place where the Stone Roses were seen on national television. It's the first place where Happy Mondays were seen on national television. It's the first place where we were seen on national television. So I think that might have contributed to this idea that with this sort of with this sort of Holy Three, the Manchester scene. So, you know, we did do quite a lot of TV. There was regional TV back in that time. And it's funny because I think sometimes there's this kind of there's this false idea that the internet has made access towards mass broadcasting easier, and I'm not convinced it has, actually. I mean, in the band I was in before, Inspiral Carpets, we did a Peel session, and the way we got a Peel session was we just somehow got the phone number of the office next to where John Peel did his show from. We just rang him up and said, can we do a session? He said yes. You'd never be able to do that now in a million years.
But sorry, guys.
Like So It Goes began as a regional show, didn't it? I think it got national networked in the end, didn't it? But
I don't think it took very long because it was just so little content.
Yeah.
That and he maybe did another show after So It Goes, but I don't know what it was called before The Other Side of Midnight. But it was syndicated in it was syndicated in the ATV region.
Was it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, so we saw bands like Susan the Banshees and Stranglers, and you know, probably loads of bands that people are now going to say weren't on that show. But we saw a lot of punk bands before they'd got a lot of national coverage, or new wave bands.
So, as we've already seen, our guest this week is the wonderful Tom Hingley, former lead singer of the Inspiral Carpets and now a formidable singer-songwriter in his own right. So, Tom, I want to ask you, back in the late 80s, early 90s, we had the Madchester scene exploding all over the airwaves. And from your point of view, Inspiral Carpets were a band who got dragged into that Madchester scene. But was there ever actually a scene, or was it just something that journalists did by clumping a few groups together to try and manufacture something in that period of music history?
That's a difficult question to answer because they were talking about attribution in art movements, and they were talking about Matisse, and like Matisse, who he basically came up with the idea of painting flowers because his son drew some flowers, and he looked at me and thought, I'm having some of that. And so his entire style came from his son, and then sort of later on they started saying that, you're part of this movement. And he wasn't really. He was just an artist who was trying different ideas and copied something that his 5-year-old son did. I think with the Manchester movement, it's a cause and effect thing. I mean, I think the thing that I found a bit tiresome with the journalists is that they tried to make out that we were just jumping on a bandwagon, whereas Clint was actually in a band with Ian Brown and Manny for about 2 weeks called The Mill, and Clint used to have this digital 8-track, I think it was, and on one of the songs he turned it over and Ian sang on the top of it. And of course there's 2 Stone Roses B-sides where they do that, which is, I'm not saying it's the most original idea in the world, but Clint had done it with them 5 years earlier. So for someone to turn around and say, you're just like this beneficiary of something that someone else did is not right, and then, so I think partly it's true, there was a bit of a scene, but, we did these gigs where we went and did a tour around America, and we did maybe 12 gigs, and flew on a plane, and it was during the first Gulf War, so there was no one on the plane, and the stewardesses were just offering us loads and loads of drinks because there was no one on the planes. And we sold T-shirts and all this lot. And as we got round there, we found that Paul Cons from the Hacienda had just told everyone that it was a factory tour. It was a Hacienda tour. It had absolutely nothing to do with the Hacienda at all. It had absolutely nothing to do with, if they'd paid our air flights, if they paid £10,000 towards putting the whole thing on, of which they did absolutely fuck all, I wouldn't have minded. So there were actually agents in that movement who were trying to compile their own non-involvement into things that they weren't involved with. So, you know, and there's a story actually in my book Carpet Burns, because I wrote a memoir called Carpet Burns. There's a story where Happy Mondays were going to play at the GMEX Centre, and it's actually the 30th anniversary tomorrow of us playing at the GMEX Centre on the 21st of July 1990. And so their agent rang up, and this is before mobile phones, so Anthony Boggiana, our manager, was in our office. And so this guy rang up and he said, so he said, we've heard that you're telling people that we're going to be supporting Happy Mondays in sort of March 1990. We're not. And he said, oh yeah, you are. He said, no, we're not. You haven't asked us to do it. And we didn't really want to do it because we didn't really want to become their pet support band, because if you became their pet support band like Northside or something, like, some people would just never take you seriously, and we wouldn't even be having this discussion now, because you just would have been part of that pageant. Wouldn't even be able to say that you'd stood apart from it. So Brian Turner, he said, well, why aren't you? So Anthony cupped his hand over the phone. He said, why aren't we doing it? And I said to Anthony, because we're going to play there ourselves as a headlining gig. So he went back to him and said, we're going to play there ourselves as a headlining gig. He's put the phone down. So we all looked at one another slightly. Well, I just thought it was a good idea. It's 12,000 capacity at that time. So we rang up Simon Moran, who's obviously like the biggest promoter in, well, he's the most important person in music outside America, outside Hollywood, in the whole world, you know. But at that time was starting out to promote with SJM. We said, we want to play there. And they said, well, it's £23,000 to hire the venue. So as long as you underwrite that, if it all goes wrong, something that he now says that he didn't say, but he did say that, we'll let you do it. So we put it on sale and it sold out. So the reason why we headlined there is because I just was bloody minded, and I didn't want us, you could see that this arch of success was going to happen with us that had happened with the other bands, but people in record companies in London, all that lot, they didn't understand it. And not only did they not understand it, they didn't want to understand it. I mean, we did about 5 or 6 singles in 1989, our own label, and the last one, Move, which came out in well, I'm going to say it came out in July maybe of 1989. It got to number 49 in the top hundreds charts. You know, I mean, so like the thing about that is that we were completely independent. We've been distributed by this company called 9 Mile that also was part of Rough Trade that used to distribute Stock Aitken and Waterman and stuff like that. And since then, Pete Waterman's gone on about, oh, you know, all the indie bands hated like Kylie and Jason. No, we didn't, because we knew that we'd get paid for selling our records. We might not play pop music like Kylie and Jason, but we're not stupid. Please credit us with a bit of intelligence. If they're selling a whole boatload of records, that means that we'll actually get paid when our records sell. We weren't stupid. Yeah. You know, we're the little rats clinging onto the side of the boat. We're not the captain. Oh, Jesus, that's just ridiculous. You know.
And was there any problem in Manchester? Because I mean, obviously you kind of came into Manchester, didn't you, in a sense, coming from Oxford? Did you get a feeling in Manchester that there was a problem with Factory Records? Because Factory had kind of built this myth about themselves. We
would never assign to Factory Records. I'll give you the good points about Factory Records. There's far more good points than there are bad points about Factory Records. Factory Records signed Joy Division, you know, then they had New Order. They had OMD for their first single, Electricity. They had the Dritty column. They had Happy Mondays. I think they might have had James for one single.
Good.
Now, forgive me if I forgot. I'd had ACR, of course, you know. Now, forgive me if you're someone who was in a great band on Factory. Northside were okay as well. And those are all really good things. But my God, they didn't know how to run a record label. I mean, like, I used to work at the Hacienda collecting glasses, and they had like an ID magazine party there. And this is before mobile phones or the internet. They had this sort of young lady going around filming footage on a video camera, and they went back behind the bar and they were filming Tony Wilson filling up, you know, glasses off optics. And I just told us, I said, clear on out there, gal. You can't just film anywhere you want. Why? Because you're going to start filming the numbers that you put in the till to tell you how to open the till. You can't, you know, even then, this is before the age of mobile phones. People, they got like a recording device. They thought, A, it gave them the permission to go anywhere they wanted, and B, that they couldn't actually be editorially checked for anything that they were doing. So what I'm saying is that I can't remember what your question was, but I hope I've answered it.
You know, the Inspiral Carpets, you mentioned earlier, you know, it's 30 years since you played the GMEX. And that 1 or 2 years when you really were at your peak in terms of sales and popularity, must have been an incredible time. And you must have done some absolutely, the GMEX must have been a memorable gig. But I mean, I remember seeing you, I was at the Reading Festival in 1990 on that Saturday night when you had the Buzzcocks, the Wedding Presents and Inspiral Carpets headlining. And I remember majorettes on stage, and you know, it was a really celebratory gig. I was right down at the front for that. So amongst all those brilliant, amazing gigs, and you must be something you did in other countries as well, are there any particular gigs that really, really stand out for you as being special?
I mean, probably the best gig in the UK is probably Barrowland, you know, up in Glasgow. And there was a gig that we did where when the Old Firm were playing, and we had like we did toy with the idea of having like some of it broadcast on a screen until we got told that we'd get bottled. But there were two distinct points in the gig, which was a great gig, where Celtic scored and half of the audience cheered, and the other half of the audience booed, and then sort of 10 minutes later, Rangers scored, and exactly the opposite half of the audience who cheered previously booed. Exactly the opposite half.
It's fascinating, Tom, to hear you talk about those various Manchester venues. I mean, I remember going to the Hacienda when it opened around '84. I saw bands like the Pogues. I remember Gil Scott-Heron playing a 20-minute set before walking off. But
that was probably the longest gig he ever did. You know? Sorry. It's probably the longest gig he ever did. I mean, he had an interesting rider. He had an interesting rider that he asked for one blonde woman and one brunette woman. Those were standard parts of his performance rider, apparently.
I did not know that. But I do remember the gallery, and that was on Peter Street and Deansgate, wasn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it's been knocked down now. There's, as they say in Spinal Tap, don't go there. It's not there anymore. The Electric Onion, don't go there. It's not there anymore.
And in fact, sadly, I heard that Gorilla and the Deaf Institute. I mean, I'm from Manchester, so I know the city pretty well. But I hear those two venues have come to the end of the road, haven't they, as a result of the pandemic?
I don't know what to say, because I always do this thing. I do this thing every single time where I don't say what I'm supposed to say. You're not asking me to say anything.
No, not at all.
But I don't say the de facto thing that I really ought to say, and always gets me into trouble. I think at least one of those venues was in trouble anyway, even before the pandemic. So you have to be a little bit careful. You know, I'll just keep it brief because I can go on and on. The place where we were in culture before the pandemic started, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry it's happening, and I'm really sorry that people have been maimed and killed and died from it. And I'm a great believer in wearing masks and all that lot, and not being into conspiracies and all that lot. But the culture that we were living prior to the pandemic, everything had gone to greatest hits. Everything had gone to being going from things being nuanced and countercultural to being mainstream. And we were living a life that we couldn't live anymore, you know. And you know, my brother, I've got four brothers. One brother's, he's sort of a bit of an iconoclast. He's probably a bit right wing. I think he really ought to be like a DJ on Talk Sport. I think he'd get paid a lot of money. It's very funny and very, very cynical. But he was saying capitalism is about moving goods and products around at a faster and faster and faster rate, and we just got to this kind of globalization and this level of capitalism that couldn't be maintained. And I don't mean it from like a Brexit perspective necessarily, but, and you know, they had the guy who used to run Pizza Express on the radio the other day, and he was saying that on Friday on Radio 4, and he was saying that he now runs Gale's Bakers, which I think is a very, very, very posh version of Greg's, although they don't really want you to think that it is. But and he was saying, we need to get all these people back into the offices in the West End. We need to get all these people back into offices in London. No, we don't. We don't need to get anybody back into an office if you can do it as we're doing it. We don't need people commuting for 3 hours of their day. We don't need people paying £17,000 a year for a train ticket where they can't sit down. We don't need cars all over the place. I know that you'll agree with us. We really do not want to go back to that. And we certainly don't want to go back to that because a load of donors to the Conservative Party own a load of premium office equipment, office space. We haven't got enough. We haven't got enough places for people to live in Britain, And I know you'd agree with me, but that we need to just give people a basic minimum wage. There's never going to be enough jobs for people to do in Britain, and the problem is that what we've actually got in Britain is that someone like Cummings I think he's calculated that we only actually need 10 million people to work in Britain in order for them to keep their children in a ridiculously expensive school.
So in the final section of our show, we ask our guest, who today is Tom Hingley, to bring along a piece of music that they'd like to talk about. And Tom, you'd like to talk about that wonderful Prince song, Sign of the Times. So why have you brought that one along today?
I'll try and keep it brief. Sorry, because I don't seem to be able to talk about anything without slagging people off. But you see, I know it's wrong to compare Prince to Michael Jackson, but I'm afraid I am going to. I liked everything Michael Jackson did until Off the Wall, and I never truly liked. There's moments of brilliance like Billie Jean, but I never really liked anything he did after Off the Wall.
No, I agree. I totally agree with you.
Whereas Prince, obviously he had his moment in the 80s as well, but Sign of the Times, I've been coming across this thing. I'm not very creative at the moment, but I've come up with this idea because I walk around the park. I try and do 5 miles a day. So I've come up with this idea about if you were going to rewrite songs now, how would they change? So I'm thinking of writing like a whole essay or a series of essays about the Ian Dury song called Reasons to be Cheerful Part 3, because I want to go through all the cultural icons that he goes through to explain to people why he goes through those cultural icons. Like the first line is Some of Buddy Holly. That's a completely brilliant line, isn't it? So I'd have to look at what tracks by Buddy Holly are good, what tracks by Buddy Holly are bloody awful. So anyway, the same thing with Prince. If you did a song called Sign of the Times now, you could probably just recreate that song, but it wouldn't be AIDS, would it? It would be, not that that's gone away, it would be COVID-19, so wouldn't it?
And I think there's a line in that song, I mean, I'm thinking about it today, that line says, I'll have to read it down, when a rocket ship explodes and everybody still wants to fly, because that what happened just after the Challenger explosion, the space shuttle. And it's that same concept of it doesn't matter how much you throw shit at people, they'll still buy it. And Trump is the classic example of that. He's going to get elected again, probably. And it's that same concept, isn't it?
I mishear that line because this is where I'm glad I've got a little star above my head. I'm going to try and make it appear because I think that line is very much Nietzsche. I think it's from Nietzsche. And I think it's also about this idea that everyone wants to die. It's kind of, wants to fly because basically they want to go out in a blaze of glory. Mm. And we'll get married. We'll have a baby. We'll call it Lady if it's a boy. So it's basically saying find your own meaning, because there's nothing out there to lay out what the meanings ought to be. It's also a hard. People always talk about Prince as if he's a complete auteur, as if he's completely original, but he's very much standing in the footprints of Marvin Gaye and Curtis Mayfield and probably half a dozen other people.
With Prince, I mean, he was an extraordinary figure. I tend to disagree with your take on the Quincy Jones, Michael Jackson period, which I preferred more than you did. But Prince wasn't that political that often, considering he was such a prolific producer of recorded work. And I think Sign of the Times was a rare time when he stood up and really expressed sort of political views. I mean, he was a wondrous artist. As you say, he was bringing together Little Richard and Jimi Hendrix and James Brown. He was a great amalgam. But he was normally thinking about I guess, spiritual things and romantic things rather than political issues. And Sign of the Times was a fantastic break in some ways from his usual repertoire.
It reminds me of what's going on, you know, like Marvin Gaye, you know, he sang songs about, you know, we're landing on the moon, and there's just millions of people starving, you know, across America, and you know, and I think Prince, he was political sometimes. I mean, he did a couple of songs about people who died of AIDS, you know, which I don't think, you know, he did that song "If I Was Your Girlfriend," which is sort of talking about gender stereotypes. I think it sounds whimsical. That song sounds whimsical, but it isn't actually. It's kind of saying, you know, if you're a man, you ought to treat sort of women with respect, and you should treat them. You know, I can't explain. It's complicated. It's sort of saying if you don't believe in gender roles, it's positive. It's saying if you do believe in gender roles, it's positive. So I think his political domain might have been personal as well. But no, what you said is very smart.
We always end our show talking about one of our guests' songs, and I've been listening the last couple of weeks to your most recent album, Tom, Hymns for the Hungry. And the song I'd like to just briefly talk about from that, which I've really, really enjoyed listening to, is Glory Day. And I think in this time of when there sometimes appears not much hope for the future, you're looking back to your own past in that song, and just reminiscing how wonderful those glory days for you were. So how you know, it may be self-explanatory. How did that song come about?
Well, I suppose I wrote this book, Carpet Burns, which was a memoir of the band. And I suppose it is a kind of warts and all, but it is a whinge and all as well, because I didn't necessarily express how wonderful it was playing with those individuals at that time in that band. It was superb and fantastic. So I suppose the song was a little by way of an apology for not being more positive about that time in the band. It's an interesting song because I went through this phase of tuning my guitar up to a D major chord, which is not a very standard way of tuning guitar. And you probably only can get away with it if you're someone who does a lot of kicks and can afford to pay for a lot of strings, because it doesn't keep strings in their best order, really, having them tuned up sometimes by a tone or whatever. So it was almost like automatic songwriting, because I just found that the song leapt out of the guitar just by deed of changing the tuning. Because I played standard tuning. I mean, I played guitar, I don't want to go on about it, but I probably played guitar for 42, 43 years. So for the first 38 years I played on standard tuning, and since then I've been using alternative tunings and a capo. And the interesting thing about alternative tunings is it almost makes the possibility of the guitar neck wider, so it's almost as wide as a book. And using capos, it alters the intervals between the frets, so it's almost making like the guitar neck telescopic. So if you kind of do both, you really take the guitar out for a walk, you know, if you know the standard tuning. Yeah. But you'll get that because you're a guitarist, and Simon will get that. A lot of people out there say, "I wonder if he's on. What's he taking? Is it tea that he's got in here, or is it just?"
And in the song, Tom, you say the best. You say the best days of my life were when I was young.
Mm.
Are you dissociating that from yourself now and just thinking of a period of your life? Because you clearly seem fairly happy about family life and everything now, and what you're doing in terms of your music. So is that looking at a different Tom Hingley in a sense?
Well, the thing is that you never realise when you were young, some people go through, we're kind of living through a period of infantilism, where people just behave like infants, infantilism, I can't say it. Like you walk around the park, people dump rubbish everywhere. We've just bred a whole, it's a bit right-winging, but kind of bred a whole generation of people who walk around like they're 5-year-old toddlers who kind of Love Island, Made in Chelsea, mass production, mass production conformist individualism. You know, I'm not wearing a mask because it won't help me, you know, and that's where we're sitting in. So when I was young, we didn't give a shit, you know, and we mostly, we gave, you know, we didn't, yeah. So, I mean, my parents were a lot older than me. I mean, my dad was 45 when I was born, I was youngest of 7. My mum was 35. You know, my mother's grandfather died in the Chinese Civil War. He got killed by the communists in 1937. You know, my father's grandfather was, he was like a preacher in the trenches in the First World War. I mean, these are just, you know, so when I was young, I felt young. I don't feel very young now. I feel old. I mean, it's, I think, you know, my mum always used to say to me, oh, you know, the world's going to, you know, she's quite conservative, the world's going to like hell in a handcart. No, mum, it'll all be all right. And she died, and then you're the next one off the edge. You think, oh God, she might actually have had a point.
It's been brilliant talking to you tonight, and it's been fantastic catching up about the tales of years ago with the Inspiral Carpets, everything. Good luck with your writing endeavours, and good luck with your songwriting and everything. And Tom, it's just been brilliant catching up and talking to you again, old pal.
Thanks, Tom.
Nice one. Really nice speaking to you too, Simon. I'm sorry, I just talk way too much. You know, I'm like a cannon that's constantly being filled full of cannonballs. So.